evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading some articles to you out of National Geographic's History magazine. And the theme for this video is famous kings, which I've already done a video on. I've done a video on famous kings, one on famous queens. So this is famous kings part 2. I'll link my History magazine playlist up there so you can check out those videos and many others. These articles were actually chosen by my channel members. They picked out which famous kings we're going to be discussing today. These articles were chosen by Chris W., Danny, Dreadlock Kickboxer, Luna, Krista, and Alessia. Thank you all so much. And yes, people can choose one that's already been selected. That's why there's so many, because lots of people were interested in these stories. And if you would like to pick future History magazine articles, you can click the join button right down there. Or if you're on mobile and it's not there, you can click the very first link in the description box right down there to join the membership. Sorry for the motorcycle outside. You can join the channel memberships at only 99 cents, the cheapest it can possibly be. And you get lots and lots of perks, behind the scenes videos, exclusive ASMR content, most of which is audio only. And you get your name at the start of every video, including far more perks. I should be getting my next issue probably next week or very early the week after. So very soon I'll be posting a video with a list of articles that you can choose from. So if you'd like to get on it, now's the time to join. Click the join button or the first link in the description box. So we are going to start off with this fascinating article about the princes in the tower, which is probably the most famous historical cold case in the United Kingdom. But we're also going to read about King Tut, which I need to warn you that there is a picture of a mummy, an actual mummy in this article. So if that does bother you, you might want to darken your screen or turn off your video and just listen to the audio. That's totally fine. We're also going to read about King Kamehameha the First, a very, very fascinating figure in Polynesian history. And we're going to end things with, there's not a picture of him, but of his very famous castle here. The Swan King, or here it says the fairy tale king of Bavaria, Ludwig II. So let's get right into it. Like I said, we're going to start with this one because I feel like it's just probably like the most fascinating article I've ever read in History magazine. So this one is quite different from other articles in that it was written by Philippa Langley, who very famously led a quest to find the remains of Richard III, and she was successful. So this is about her getting to the bottom of what happened to the princes in the tower, which according to Shakespeare, Richard III had them murdered, right? But what really happened? We're gonna find out. I don't know if it mentions it, how Richard III was found here, but if not, we'll talk about it. Here's the Tower of London. The Looking for Richard project was a research initiative that questioned received wisdom and dogma. It proved the bones in the river story to be false. For centuries, it had been believed that at the time of the dissolution of the monasteries in the late 1530s, Richard III's remains were exhumed from their resting place, carried through the streets of Leicester by a jeering mob, and reburied near the river Soar. Later it was claimed they were exhumed again and thrown into the river. Without any supporting evidence, the story had been repeated as truth and fact by leading historians. The Looking for Richard project heralded a new era of evidence-based Richard III research and analysis. It was a major opportunity for the academic community and leading historians to employ this new knowledge as the basis for further discoveries. On March 23, 2015, during Reburial Week, a headline in the Daily Mail proclaimed, "It's mad to make this child killer a national hero. Richard III was one of the most evil, detestable tyrants ever to walk this earth." The writer, Michael Thornton, presented no verification or proof. His piece drew online comments from around the world, best summed up by Catherine from Chicago. This article shows a complete disregard for what counts as historical evidence. Yes, Catherine from Chicago. Dragon. On March 22, 2015, as Richard's coffin was received by Leicester Cathedral in preparation for his reburial, Channel 4 TV presenter Jon Snow, which if you're not from the UK or UK savvy like me, Jon Snow is a legend in BBC News and British television. A legend. Jon Snow asked a Tudor historian for the evidence of Richard's murder of the princes in the Tower. The evidence, the historian replied, is that he would have been a fool not to do it. A few days later, on March 26th, the evening of King Richard's reburial, in another of Snow's television interviews, I was asked, "What's next?" "There's a big question to answer now," I replied. "What happened to the sons of Edward IV?" The right questions. I had seen how asking questions changes what we know and is a key to greater understanding and important new discoveries. This was how the king had been found. It's Richard III right there. Historical inquiries littered with the unpicking of received wisdom. Antonia Fraser helped to debunk the myth that Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Virginia Rounding refuted the claim that Catherine the Great had been killed by having sexual relations with a horse. William Driver Haworth disproved that doigt du seigneur, or prima nocta, existed in medieval Scotland, as depicted in the film Braveheart. And Guillaume Pepin established that the killings by the Black Prince of some male inhabitants and men-at-arms, the city of Limoges in 1370, believed for centuries to have amounted to the massacre of 3,000 men, women, and children, concerned in reality just 300 individuals. All had asked searching questions, thrown out old mythology, and started with a clean sheet. It was exactly as my Looking for Richard project had proceeded, irrevocably changing what we know. Could this approach apply to the mystery surrounding the princes in the Tower? While I considered my next steps, I watched with interest The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, the actor who had read the evocative poem Richard at the reburial in 2015. That's not a very good movie, by the way, but loosely based on Andrew Hodge's biography of Alan Turing, this highly acclaimed award-winning feature film retells the breaking of the Enigma code during the Second World War. When you ask the right questions, the smallest detail can form the key to a major discovery. Could a small and perhaps seemingly insignificant discovery be the key to solving this most enduring of mysteries? Richard and the Princes. I have studied the life and times of Richard III for nearly 30 years. It is a fascinating period of history, inspiring George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones fantasy series, and of course William Shakespeare's famous play. And therein, it seems, lies the dichotomy of the two representations of Richard III, the loyal lord of the North, one interpretation, and the murdering psychopath. Two extremes, certainly, but as we may all attest, life is many shades of gray. I was clear from the outset that I had to be prepared for whatever might be uncovered. The Looking for Richard project had sought to lay the king to rest. It was now time to investigate the final question surrounding Richard III, in the hope of making peace with the past on both sides of the debate. In the summer of 1483, two children disappeared, Edward V, age 12, and his brother Richard, Duke of York, age 9. The inquiry into their disappearance would, therefore, fall into the category of a cold case missing persons investigation, employing the same principles and practices as a modern police inquiry. Intelligence gathering would be key. It was not by any stretch of the imagination an easy task. Apparent red herrings seemed to litter the stories surrounding the disappearance, and each would have to be analyzed and investigated. The project could not afford to miss anything, no matter how seemingly insignificant. Everything was on the radar. The Missing Princes Project. So how could a cold case investigation help move our knowledge forward? Hadn't the events that led to the disappearance taken place too long ago for any meaningful modern analysis? I discovered that successful cold case inquiries are based on what I termed the HRH system of investigative analysis, which is a good pun. That is the removal of hindsight, recreating the past as accurately and realistically as possible by drilling down into that moment, and the introduction of the human element in order to more properly understand the intelligence gathered. In short, this is the analysis of who was doing what, where, when, why, with whom, and with what consequences. The advice of police investigators suggested the use of well-regarded methods such as TIE and ABC. TIE is the police acronym for Trace, Investigate, Eliminate. As witnesses to the disappearance are clearly unavailable for interview, timelines and an extensive database would reference and cross-check movements and begin to trace and eliminate individuals from the investigation. The second police acronym, ABC, Accept Nothing, Believe Nobody, Challenge Everything, would ensure that evidence was properly corroborated. The project would also employ Occam's razor, a problem-solving device in which the simplest explanation is generally correct. With these parameters in mind, the Missing Princes Project set out in the summer of 2015 with 3 lines of investigation. This quickly developed into 111 lines of inquiry. In July 2016, at the Middleham Festival, the Missing Princes Project was formally launched. Previously, on December 15, 2015, the website went live. Within a few short hours, the project secured its first 8 members. In the weeks and months that followed, over 300 volunteers from around the world would join. Ordinary people were prepared to investigate archives, many with specialist knowledge of paleography, or ancient writing, and Latin, others with European language skills. Members of police forces and Ministry of Defense specialists also joined, as did medieval historians and specialists across a number of fields, including input from some of the world's leading forensic anthropologists. It was exciting and daunting in equal measure. The search for the truth had begun. The Lost Boys. The investigation began by examining the time of the disappearance, analyzing it moment by moment, and using all available contemporary material to place this period under the spotlight. By employing forensic techniques, we went back to the prince's last known location to recreate the past and build an extensive person of interest file of those around them and connected to them. We also analyzed exactly what was known about the two missing individuals at the center of our endeavors to further inform lines of investigation and inquiry. Profiling revealed that both children, who were male, had large households and were well known. The elder, Edward, age 12, was a preteen who may not have been as physically robust as his younger sibling. He had an aptitude for poetry and literature, and facially resembled his father. He seemed to have been prone to melancholia, which may have related to the onset of puberty and very likely the distressing change in his circumstances. Prior to disappearance, he had been seen by Londoners ceremonially entering the city as the new king, and later as he traveled to the royal apartments at the Tower Palace. On both occasions, he would have been accompanied by leading members of church, state, and commons. Richard, the younger boy, age 9, presented as a happy and energetic child, who was strikingly pretty and considered to be in general good health. He had an aptitude for music, dancing, singing, and it seems sport, possibly including archery and later tennis. Unlike his older brother, Richard lived in the capital. Immediately prior to his disappearance, he was seen by Londoners traveling by barge from Westminster to join his brother at the Tower Palace. The flotilla consisted of at least 8 barges and included leading members of church and state. both boys may be described as celebrities. They were last seen playing in the gardens of the busy Tower Palace on several occasions. They were blonde and seemed to have displayed a noticeable degree of charm. Timing and evidence. Investigation of the timeline for the disappearance revealed a potential window of 2 months, July 18th to September 20th, which could be extended to 3 months to October 28th. Intelligence gathered revealed a disparity between local accounts at the time of the disappearance and those from abroad. Wider analysis revealed that a pretender from France, Henry Tudor, introduced the charge of murder against Richard III into England immediately prior to the Battle of Bosworth. The accusation of murder then took hold until the demise of the Tudor dynasty, when contemporary documents were investigated and the descendants of several families interviewed. These challenged the Tudor story of murder and presented instead the possibility of the boys' survival. Further forensic analysis of the immediate post-Bosworth period revealed no evidence of murder or witness. A rapid search in the north by Henry Tudor failed to locate the missing individuals, as did later investigations at the Tower. Murder victims or survivors. Further investigation uncovered a contemporary blueprint for physical removal of the princes, which did not involve or require harm. As evidence for their survival mounted, the investigation was widened to consider 2 claimants to the throne. Both claimants were of the right age and description for the missing individuals. The project then uncovered documented proof of life for both missing individuals, the elder in 1487, the younger sibling in 1493. When I first launched the Missing Princes project, I was asked what I would like to find. I replied that I would like to find a witness statement written by one of the boys and detailing exactly what had happened to them, with names and places and verifiable facts. I smiled, and the audience burst into appreciative laughter, clearly hoping for the same seemingly impossible discovery. 4 years later, that would turn out to be exactly what was uncovered by Natalie Nyman Bleikendal in the Gelderland Archive of the Netherlands. I'll never forget sitting at my desk on a bright November afternoon in 2020, reading her email, and yes, I had goosebumps. A timeline for the younger missing person, Richard, Duke of York, is now in place. We can track his removal from the Tower of London on or by August 11th, 1483, his travels to the island of Texel in 1495, subsequent invasions of England, and his 8-year campaign for the throne. A timeline for our elder missing person, Edward V, is a significant focus. Current evidence suggests Edward was placed in the Channel Islands on or before late 1485, traveled to Viscount Francis Lovell in Yorkshire by April 1486, and was established in Ireland by August of that year. He then seems to have crossed to Burgundy, returning to Ireland with his English and Continental forces in May 1487 for coronation and invasion of England and subsequent battle at Stoke Field. As the boys were separated at the Tower on or by mid-late July 1483, Edward's steps from this point to early 1486 are currently unknown. It has been an exciting Phase 1 of our investigation. Phase 2 promises to be equally exciting. Phase 2 of the Missing Princes project aims to attempt to answer these questions and, if possible, locate the final resting place of both princes. Is that fascinating? This is an excerpt from her book about the subject, The Princes in the Tower. Here's a document that proves that Edward V was still alive in 1487. How fascinating is that? This was their aunt that probably helped them escape. Richard III's, funeral shroud and a little crown there. And there's his funeral procession there. So, what happened, it talks about it here, that's where it talks about it, was that they'd managed to locate his remains underneath what was a car park, or as we say in America, a parking lot. And, he was properly reburied. So now we're hoping that maybe the same will happen for the princes someday. I know there's a story about like two little boys' bones being found in the tower in I think like the 1700s. But then once DNA analysis came out, they proved it wasn't them. And that makes sense now because we do have proof that they did survive and were not murdered by Richard III, as popularly believed, like it said, pressed by Henry Tudor. Fascinating, right? I know it's not a typical history magazine article, but the rest will be. So let's get into it. Let me move them out the way. Excuse me, boys. Let's read about King Tut, the mysteries of Tut. And like I said, there is a picture of, it's his mother, an actual mummy in this article, not coming up, but it is here. So please keep that in mind if you're sensitive to things like that. And I'm probably going to mispronounce things because names in this dynasty period of Egypt were very hard to pronounce. Here we go. From the earliest days of archaeology in Egypt, the Valley of the Kings has exerted an irresistible allure. The famed cemetery was the burial place of royals during the golden age of the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties. Conducted since at least the early 1800s, excavations have revealed that most of the rock-cut tombs in the area were thoroughly looted in antiquity. The one great exception, the four richly appointed chambers of King Tutankhamun Nebkepururi, yielded not only a stunning trove of artifacts, but a glimpse of the country's astounding wealth and culture during the 14th century BCE. Since its discovery in 1922, King Tut's tomb has provided ample evidence that has allowed both experts and amateurs to puzzle out the young pharaoh's life and times, including the political intrigues that must have swirled around him in the wake of his succession to the throne. Some parts of the picture fit neatly together, while other details are not so clear. Now, a century after the tomb's discovery, is perhaps a fitting moment to consider what the experts have learned and at what they can still only guess. Surprising find. The story of the discovery of King Tut's final resting place begins in 1902, 2 decades before its discovery, when Egypt granted permission to American lawyer and businessman Theodore Davis to dig in the Valley of the Kings. Davis would go on to fund excavations there for more than a decade, discovering and excavating some 30 tombs. He also unearthed tantalizing clues about the young king, whose name was mostly absent from historical records. Davis came across 2 minor deposits containing artifacts with Tutankhamun's name. One was an embalming cache, the other held embossed decorative gold from chariots. Davis believed he had found the mysterious pharaoh's burial, but he was disappointed with the artifacts. Other underwhelming discoveries that he made subsequently convinced him that it was finally time to quit. I fear that the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted, he explained. According to one report, Davis had come within 6 feet of Tutankhamun's tomb. That's pretty much like 1.5 meters, by the way. So close. His pivotal decision to give up his concession in the valley on the very brink of success allowed Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy Englishman, to step in 1914. Working for Carnarvon, archaeologist Howard Carter conducted excavations over the next 8 years before uncovering the steps leading to King Tut's tomb on November 4th, 1922. After slowly, carefully removing and cataloging many hundreds of dazzling funerary artifacts, Carter was finally able to open Tut's nested coffins in late 1925 and gaze upon the mummy. The youthful pharaoh was before us at last, an obscure and ephemeral ruler, ceasing to be the mere shadow of a name, he wrote. Here was the climax of our long researches. By then, King Tut had become one of the most famous people in the world. His image and name were everywhere. In the field of Egyptology, the once little-known ruler was now one of the pharaohs that historians knew best. Family tree. Clues uncovered in Tut's tomb, KV62, the 62nd burial complex found in the valley, confirm that he was one of the successors of heretic King Amenhotep IV. The latter chose a new name, Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, the god that the king decided to worship to the exclusion of all others. In the distinctive art of the era, the Aten appears as a sun disk whose rays deliver blessings and eternal life. Tut's original name was Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. He was surely born in Akhenaten's new capital, Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten, today the archaeological site of Amarna. Everyone at court, government officials and bureaucrats, and thousands of artisans and laborers had moved to Akhetaten with the king, abandoning the traditional capital of Thebes, modern Luxor. That occurred in the midst of a religious revolution in which Akhenaten made the Aten the country's one official god. As centuries of polytheistic tradition were suddenly upended, with the old gods falling out of favor, confusion and terror must have gripped the country. Diagram of Tut's tomb there. According to the results of DNA tests published in 2010, a decayed mummy found in tomb KV55 was Tut's father. Some Egyptologists believe that it was Akhenaten, based largely on royal epithets on the coffin, but other experts have their doubts. They wonder if the bones might belong to someone else, perhaps a shadowy figure named Smenkhkare, who may have been Akhenaten's brother. Like many ancient Egyptian royals, Akhenaten had more than one wife. His queen was the famously beautiful Nefertiti, and together they had 6 daughters, Meritaten, Mekhetaten, Ankhsenapaten, Neferneferuaten Tasheret, Neferuri, and Setpenri. History shows that the royal couple probably did not produce a son needed to secure the succession. Archaeologists would have to look elsewhere for the identity of Tut's mother. Akhenaten's other wives included a woman named Kia, possibly a foreign princess, who was once thought to be a possible candidate for Tut's mother. But DNA tests revealed that Tut was the son of a female mummy found in KV35, known as the Younger Lady, who's this mummy right here. That woman was also the sister of the man from KV55, Tut's father, making Tut the product of sister-brother incest. The names of 5 of Akhenaten's sisters are known, but which one might be the woman from KV35 is a mystery. Next in line. The name of Akhenaten's immediate successor is also uncertain. Nefertiti may have been a co-ruler with her husband at the end of his reign, which lasted about 17 years. She then could have continued to rule in her own right after his death, perhaps even taking a man's throne name to mask being a female ruler. But there's another person in the mix here, Smenkhkare. Did he become king upon Nefertiti's death? Or did Nefertiti not rule at all, and it was Smenkhkare who succeeded Akhenaten? His rise to the top would make sense. He had the right lineage, and he may have been married to Meritaten, the oldest of Akhenaten and Nefertiti's daughters. Whoever preceded Tut didn't rule for long, and the prince became king when he was about 9 years old. As an heir and parent, he may have been schooled in all things a pharaoh would need to do to keep the gods happy and Egypt prosperous. But at such a young age, he couldn't have been ready to rule or to deal with the political and religious chaos left by Akhenaten. Tut must have had advisors, and they apparently were focused on restoring Egypt to what it had been before Akhenaten's reign. They moved the court back to Thebes, reinstated the old gods, and restored Maat, the foundational Egyptian concept of order and things as they should be. Reign of the Boy King. When he came of age, Tut married, as all pharaohs should do. His wife was Ankhsenapaten, Akhenaten and Nefertiti's daughter. If Akhenaten was indeed Tut's father, that meant Tut married his half-sister, another point of incest in the family tree. By this time, Tut and his wife had changed their names to reflect the country's religious reset and the rehabilitation of Amen, a powerful god based in Thebes. They were Tutankhamen, living image of Amen, and Ankhsenamen. She lives through Amen. Although incest may have been an attractive strategy for keeping power in the family, it was genetically risky. In this instance, the risk did not pay off. 2 fragile mummified fetuses were discovered in King Tut's tomb, each with her own tiny nested inner and outer wooden coffins. They were his daughters with Ankhsenamen. The young couple tried to do their duty and produce an heir, but couldn't. The shared genes they inherited probably made it impossible for them to conceive a healthy baby, thus setting up the inevitable end of the 18th dynasty. Given his genetic background, it's not surprising that Tut was frail. Slight of build, he stood about 5 feet 5, and may have had ailments that impeded his ability to walk normally. Also, the 2010 test results showed that he suffered from chronic malaria, the result of living near the mosquito-filled Nile marshes. Still, it must have been a shock when he died at the age of 19. A scramble ensued to find a burial place and to surround Tut with the things a pharaoh would need for the next world. In their hurry, the officials chose a tomb far too small for a pharaoh, included artifacts that had been made for other royals, and hacked at the wooden coffin to make it fit in the stone sarcophagus. There's Tut and Ankhsenamen right here. This was a fraught time in Egyptian history. The royal succession that led to Tut's time on the throne had probably been tumultuous, and now the young king had died without leaving an heir. In that context, some historians have imagined intrigue and skullduggery, with some suggesting that a rival's blow to the head killed Tut. A CT scan conducted in 2005 put that idea to rest. The fragments of bone that a previous X-ray had revealed inside Tut's head were the result of a hasty mummification, not a bashed-in skull. A likely cause of death was a broken leg that pierced the skin. Ow. The wound became infected, leading to sepsis. The accident could have been caused by a chariot crash, a battle injury, even an attack from one of the hippos that wallowed in the Nile. Queen's fate. Around this time, an Egyptian queen, whose name is unknown, sent a letter to Suppiluliuma, king of the Hittites, Egypt's archenemies. "My husband is dead and I have no son," she wrote, asking the king to send a prince for her to marry. Some experts believe that queen was Ankhsenamen. Suppiluliuma must have seen some political advantage to such a union and sent off a son named Zananza. The prince died mysteriously en route, however, with the cause of death lost to history. Given the Game of Thrones climate of the time, murder is certainly a possibility. Some think the culprit was an Egyptian general named Horemheb, who would become king after Tut's successor, Ai. Others even go so far as to speculate that Ai was the mastermind, making a desperate end-of-career power grab once word reached Egypt about Zenanza's untimely end. Ai may have married Ankhsenamen to secure his own place on the throne. It was all in the family. Queen Tiye, Ankhsenamen's grandmother, was likely Ai's sister. The evidence for the marriage is a ring with dubious provenance. Mr. Blanchard of Cairo acquired last spring from an unknown site in the Delta a blue glass finger ring, which has engraved on its bezel the praenomen of King Ai and the name Ankhsenamen, both names being written in cartouches, wrote British Egyptologist Perry Newberry in a 1932 report that included a sketch of the cartouches. The Egyptian Museum in Berlin may have acquired that same ring from a different owner in 1973. Such artifacts have often changed hands from one private collector to another without leaving a traceable chain of custody. In any case, Ai was an old man and didn't live long after he became king. Left without an official rule, Ankhsenamen vanished from history. DNA testing suggests that she may be one of the 2 female mummies found in KV21. Hidden Chambers. In a saga filled with intriguing questions, one more has arisen recently. What may lie behind the painted walls of King Tut's tomb? In 2015, British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves suggested that Tut had been hastily buried in chambers that belonged to an earlier royal tomb complex. That preceding burial would have been sealed off and would now be hidden just beyond Tut's own burial chamber. The proposed occupant, none other than Nefertiti. Experts were skeptical at first, but then began to wonder whether an adjacent burial might even hold Meritaten. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, scans were carried out, but the results were inconclusive. The limestone in the Valley of the Kings is notoriously inconsistent, as hard and slick as marble in some places, and as crumbly as dried mud in others. Such irregularities may have prevented the GPR from getting the clearest picture of what lay beneath the ground. If additional tests are conducted in the future, they might find nothing at all. But many people still hope they will reveal a royal tomb untouched for more than 3,000 years. Such a bombshell would show yet again that the Valley of the Kings should never be counted out as a source of astonishing archaeological treasures. Theodore Davis would have discovered that if he had only had a bit more faith. Wow. Oh, that's it for the article. Okay. Very fascinating story, isn't it? This one's also equally fascinating. Kamehameha the First, which some people only know his story by name. They just know his name and nothing else about him. So let's find out about the King of Hawaii. First king of unified Hawaii. Rugged, fearsome, authoritative. All three words have been used to describe Kamehameha the first king of the unified, if short-lived, kingdom of Hawaii. Living up to his name's promise can be translated as the one set apart. Kamehameha broke the mold of his native Hawaiian aristocracy in the late 18th century, pursuing ambitions that put him in power not of a single clan or island, but an entire Pacific nation composed of once independent islands. Devoted to his people's war god, Kamehameha was extolled for his reverence, physical size and strength, military savvy, and bravery in battle. But it would take more than muscle and modern Western weaponry to bring together these separate islands into a united kingdom of Hawaii. Peppered with prophecies and legends, his life story is a compelling history of how this brawny ruler, now known as much for his statesmanship as his physical prowess, managed to pull it off and unite the islands in the face of colonialism and rival claims to the throne. Hawaiian history. The modern U.S. state of Hawaii covers the 8 former islands that once constituted the Kingdom of Hawaii, including the archipelago's chain of main islands, Hawaii or the Big Island, Maui, Oahu, Kauai, Molokai, Lanai, Niihau, and Kahoolawe, along with other minor islands and atolls in the region. But before the 19th century, each island was an entity of its own, and many were ruled by aristocratic relatives of the man who would become Kamehameha the Great. First populated by Polynesians around 1100 to 1200 CE, the Hawaiian archipelago's islands were initially governed by different self-contained chiefdoms known as mokus. Sometimes these kingdoms would encompass an entire island, while other domains covered smaller wedges of territory on an island. For example, the larger islands of Hawaii, Maui, and Oahu still contained multiple mokus that coexisted alongside each other. Mokus were each governed by a hierarchical, deeply religious code of rulers known as kanawai. According to these rules, forbidden foods, behaviors, practices, and places were considered kapu. Engaging in anything kapu could bring about severe punishment, including death. The code helped ensure appropriate behavior among a chief's subjects and helped to protect a moku's resources, guiding when and where crops were planted and harvested, as well as limiting the number and types of fish that could be caught. These top-down societies considered their chiefs second only to the gods, but the chieftains both governed and served. Though there was some focus on family inheritance, a chief had to gain and maintain mana, a potent combination of religious and political power, to rule. Maintaining political stability within a feudal chiefdom was not easy, wrote historian William H. Davenport, noting that power did not follow automatically from inherited sacred rank. Dueling prophecies. Though his exact birth date is unknown, the child who would become Kamehameha I was likely born in the 1750s in North Kohala on the Big Island of Hawaii. Though most historians believe High Chief Keoua was his father, his mother, Chiefess Kekuia Poiwa II, also claimed at one point that another chief, Kahekili II of Maui, was his father instead. Either way, Keoua recognized the child, named Paia, not like paella like the food, Paia, as his son. Regardless of the identity of his biological father, the baby's aristocratic lineage seemed to presage a future as a high chief himself. Presage? Not sure. Prophecies that lined up with the child's birth set him on a unique path. Ancient Hawaiian legend held that a child born beneath the glow of a bright star that looked like a bird would become a leader capable of supreme rule over Hawaii. The legend is thought to have aligned with the predicted appearance of Halley's Comet, which streaked across the sky in 1758, the year in which some believe the future Kamehameha was born. Others had a less charitable interpretation of this prophecy. The legend and his pregnant mother's craving to eat a shark eyeball were seen by some enemies as proof the child was extremely dangerous. They believed he would be a warlike conqueror or killer of chiefs. This suspicion endangered the infant's life, and his mother hid him away for safety. Young Paia would spend the first years of his childhood in hiding, protected by priests and foster parents in Waipio, a secluded coastal valley on the Big Island that was considered sacred. Family tensions. 5 years later, after his father's death, Paia returned home to his birth family, where he was doted on by his powerful chieftain uncle, Kalani Opu'u. Make sure it's in shot here. By rights, the boy's eldest male cousin, Kiwala'o, would have been first in line for that favor, but his uncle split his affection and his tutelage in statecraft and divine rule between his own son and his nephew. As a result, the cousins became political opponents, even though they were raised together, trained in the art of war together, and groomed to a life of rule and privilege. Tall and strong, Kamehameha was a natural warrior, and he reportedly behaved like a prince, although he was only a junior chief. According to historian Gavin Dawes, the young man conducted himself with an imperiousness that matched and even exceeded his rank. He absorbed the political lessons of his uncle, participated in a variety of battles, and also learned the art of statecraft. Kamehameha even trained in foreign relations by interacting with Anglo visitors, including Captain James Cook. The British explorer first set foot in the Hawaiian Islands in 1778 as part of an ongoing quest for a northwest passage connecting the North Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. His first visit to the island had been peaceful, and he'd been welcomed by the islanders. But the islanders' initial opinions of Cook and his crew soon soured. Sorry for the train if that bothers you. I'm sorry. British missteps and miscommunications resulted from language barriers and differing cultural attitudes, leading to insults to the islanders' property and practices. Cook and his men departed, but returned to make repairs to their ship, the Resolution. By his second visit, tensions between the British and the Hawaiians festered even more. In 1779, Hawaiians stole longboats from the Resolution. In reprisal, Cook attempted to kidnap Kalani Opu'u. A battle ensued, and the Englishmen were surrounded by thousands of Hawaiians. Kamehameha is believed to have fought in the conflict. Though accounts of what followed vary, Cook was eventually slain by one of the warriors, Nu'a. Cook's brutal death inspired fear and stoked long-standing ongoing tensions between the islanders and European settlers. Royal rivalries. A few years later, the elderly Kalani Opu'u lay on his deathbed and denounced his last wishes to his retinue. Kiwala'o, his firstborn son, would inherit his chiefdom. But in what some scholars claim was an unusual move, Kalani Opu'u entrusted the care and devotion of the war god Ku to his nephew. By making Kamehameha guardian of the war god, the old chieftain had given him great political potential, and other signs and omens seemed to point to Kamehameha's powerful future. As a teenager, Kamehameha managed to overturn a large sacred volcanic stone known as the Naha stone. Legend had it that a man who could overturn the sacred stone would be able to unite all of the Hawaiian Islands under his power. By moving the stone during a powerful ritual, the strong young man gained fame, power, and credibility throughout the archipelago. This feat exacerbated already festering resentments between the cousins. The rift was worsened when the cousins came into conflict during a drinking ceremony associated with Kalani Opu'u's funeral. Just real quick, the picture was on the other page of the stone, the Naha stone right here. Though the course of events initiated by his death is contested, it resulted in a conflict over how his lands would be distributed to his family. Kamehameha had allies among his other powerful uncles and elites, who encouraged him to seek more political power. The older, well-established leaders that were his power base saw something in him, says Paul Darcy, an associate professor of Pacific Affairs at Australian National University and author of Transforming Hawaii, which explores how Kamehameha balanced coercion and consent in his quest for power. He had been taught not just warrior craft, but statecraft. Those who allied themselves with the junior chief may have thought he could be controlled, says Darcy, but they soon learned he was actually a very good ruler. We're going to talk about this in a minute. Let's remember this temple, this religious structure here. Okay, talk about that in a second. Western weapons. That role involved plenty of battles and the adoption of some modern European weaponry as Kamehameha continued to conduct relationships with the growing number of Anglo settlers in the Hawaiian Islands. The dominant narrative emphasizes the might those muskets and ship cannons gave the ever more powerful Kamehameha, but Darcy says their role has been overstated. Though Kamehameha's people did gain European weapons, they were mostly low-quality cast-offs from the Napoleonic Wars that were wildly inaccurate, says Darcy. These guns are mostly used in guerrilla-like combat that did not resemble the types of battles his European counterparts expected. Rather than fight single, decisive battles, Kamehameha and a small elite group of warriors regularly faced off with similar groups of their enemies. It was all about honor and proving yourself in battle, he says. Kamehameha himself would have attributed his victories to the favor of the war god, not European weapons. During the bloody civil war he had helped incite, Kamehameha finished erecting a new temple in 1791, Pu'ukohola Heiau, or the Temple of the Hill of the Whale, in response to a prophecy that if he were to build a new temple to the war god Ku, he'd eventually conquer all of the Hawaiian Islands. The gigantic rock structure, built with the help of a human rock hoisting chain nearly 25 miles long, still stands today and is a U.S. National Historic Site, which was the picture on the other page that I told you to remember. Did you remember? I hope so. Might or right. In Polynesian cultures like Hawaii's, Darcy says, power isn't solely from physical might. Their doctrines of statehood involved being a ruler for the people rather than dominating people, he says. During the early days of his rule, Kamehameha and his allies were well matched by his cousin and other rivals. As a result of this, Darcy says, he had to be a diplomat more than a military leader. Nonetheless, Kamehameha did have to engage in military operations and warfare to gain territory and subjects. In 1782, he came face to face with his cousin at the Battle of Mokuohai, during which the respective armies of men loyal to Kamehameha and Kiwala'o duked it out with hand-to-hand combat on a rocky beach. Eventually, one of Kamehameha's most revered warriors killed Kiwala'o with a spear, leaving Kamehameha with his first major victory. The results of the battle granted him control over most of the north and west of the Big Island. That moment was just the start of Kamehameha's stratospheric rise. Over the years, he fought for and won the entire island of Hawaii. He then proceeded to take the islands of Maui and Molokai in 1795. Kamehameha didn't stop there. Helped along by his growing army, his savvy statesmanship, and the mana generated by his spiritual sacrifices, he turned his attention to Oahu. He was assisted in his ambitions by two British men, Isaac Davis, the sole survivor of the Fair American, and John Young, captured ashore from another ship. Kamehameha had taken the men prisoner in the wake of a fight between British settlers and Hawaiian warriors. Soon they went from captives to valued advisors. Davis and Young taught the king the ways of European warfare and helped supply him with ships, guns, and ammunition. This battle training and his growing support across the archipelago set Kamehameha up for his next conquest, Oahu. During the 1795 Battle of Nu'uanu, an epic melee over the fate of the island, he deployed between 10,000 and 12,000 warriors equipped with 1,500 canoes. His forces used muskets and even canoe-based cannons to gain victory over his rivals. That's the battle depicted up here, by the way. Western weapons did help Kamehameha gain rulership of most of the Hawaiian Islands. But after his decisive victory in Oahu, the chief actually sought to demobilize instead of gathering more weapons and military might. Disease ravaged his followers, eventually leading to a diminished fighting force. Kamehameha could have met that challenge by enlisting more warriors and preparing for other great battles. Instead, he turned to trade, making alliances with European merchants and missionaries. In 1810, he conducted a historic peace meeting with his longtime rival in Kauai, Kaumoali'i. When the leader entered Honolulu harbor, he was greeted with cannon fire. This time, though, it was celebratory, not threatening. Despite a rumored assassination plot, the meeting was peaceful and resulted in Kauai's chief bloodlessly ceding his island to Kamehameha. With that, the unification of the Hawaiian Islands was complete. Unification. The Kingdom of Hawaii was united, and Kamehameha's reign would last until his death in 1819. By then, says Darcy, Kamehameha had grown from a hot-headed young warrior into a mature, true statesman, whose power was derived not from physical might, but from his loyal community. Europe had conquered the world because of its ability to concentrate power, says Darcy. But Kamehameha eventually gained kingship of the entire island system because he respected the power of his own people, combining well-honed leadership skills with divine devotion. In any land, he would have been a leader, remembered Kalakaua, Hawaii's final king. He accomplished what no one could have done in his day. But this kingdom was short-lived. It ended in 1893 with the forced abdication of Hawaii's reigning queen, Liliuokalani, and the United States' eventual annexation of Hawaii. Many stories of Kamehameha's life are saturated in legend, and details about his burial are just as elusive. When the king died, his body was interred in strict secrecy in keeping with the traditions of hunakele. The verb, which means to hide in secret, refers to the age-old tradition of burying a Hawaiian chieftain's corpse in a location where it could not be seen, stolen, disinterred, or otherwise molested. A royal corpse that was found was considered stripped of its mana, the spiritual power so prized by traditional Polynesian cultures. As a result of the strict secrecy in which it was buried, the tomb of Kamehameha has never been found. Or has it? In 1983, a National Geographic investigation revealed the final resting place of a group of the Anglo traders of the fair American. Davis, the lone survivor, and Young from another vessel became close friends and advisors to Kamehameha, eventually aiding him in warfare and utilizing the cannons from the fair American. During the photo shoot at the site, Tyrone Young, one of the Hawaiian descendants of the fair American's crew, discovered a complete skeleton in a canoe hidden inside the lava tube complex where the other men were buried. "I felt in my heart, this is him, this is my king. Here are the lost bones of King Kamehameha the Great," he later recalled. But the remains were never identified as those of the king, and his resting place still remains secret. The island's royal past and the father of the short-lived monarchy can still be felt today. Modern Hawaii commemorates Kamehameha in a variety of ways. His name can be found on countless schools and businesses. His likeness appears on statues scattered throughout the islands, and even on a statue in the U.S. Capitol's Statuary Hall. Every year on July 11th, Hawaiians celebrate Kamehameha Day, a public holiday featuring parades, cultural exhibitions, and parties throughout the state. His reign may have been short, but Kamehameha the Great casts a long shadow on the islands he helped unify, through his savvy and statesmanship as much as his valued strength. Okay, that's the last page there. Let's move on to our final king of the night, Ludwig II, the fairy tale king, otherwise known as the Swan King. And you've probably seen this castle before, Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, which we're going to talk about soon on my channel. We're going to get to Bavaria in probably like a month and a half on my channel, so we'll talk more about it then. This is about him in particular. Famous the world over, Neuschwanstein Castle is the epitome of a fairy tale palace. Its soaring turrets inspired the designs of both Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella's castles, but Neuschwanstein's creator, King Ludwig II, did not have a charmed life. His reign coincided with the rise of modern Germany, but rather than rule, he retreated to an idealized past by building elaborate castles all over Bavaria. Born in 1845 to the House of Wittelsbach, the ruling family of Bavaria, Ludwig came to power during a period of immense upheaval in Europe. Even so, his legacy would not be statecraft, but the arts. Nicknamed the Swan King, Ludwig is remembered for his castles and his obsessive patronage of the German composer of epic operas, Richard Wagner. From a young age, Ludwig was a dreamer. As a child, he was fascinated by Bible stories, the plays of Shakespeare, and the work of the 18th century German dramatist Friedrich Schiller. The Nymphenburg Palace in Munich, where he was born, was crammed with treasures and artworks commissioned and collected by his royal ancestors. His mania for building castles surely had its origins in the splendid palaces of his childhood, which you can see here is from the palace he was born in. Although the winds of modernity were beginning to blow in Ludwig's childhood, his father's kingdom was imbued with the glories and romance of the past, a land of alpine scenery, lakes, medieval towns, and castles perched atop crags. Today, Bavaria is the largest of the federal states of modern Germany, but it has a long history as an independent kingdom. In the 10th century, Bavaria became part of the Holy Roman Empire, the federation of states that dominated Central Europe. Ludwig's ancestors came to power shortly thereafter, and the family would retain power until 1918. During the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, Bavaria differentiated itself from other Germanic states by adhering to Catholicism, and at Ludwig's birth, Bavaria was a key actor in German unification. A large part of Ludwig II's legacy lies in lingering questions of his mental state. The House of Wittelsbach did have a family history of mental illness. Ludwig's younger brother Otto suffered from schizophrenia. His eccentric reign deviated from royal norms at the time. He never married or had children. Rather than actively rule, he preferred to retreat to his castles, which were lavishly decorated with fantastical scenes from Germanic folklore and myth. Biographers have long debated if this reclusiveness and obsessive nature were caused by mental illness. Some claim that the king may have been homosexual and that a combination of his faith and pressures to marry could have led to anxiety and depression. Kingly patronage. The artistic passion that would define Ludwig II's life began at the opera. In 1861, age 15, he attended a performance of Lohengrin by Richard Wagner. The opera recounts how a divided kingdom is visited by the eponymous knight in a boat led by a swan. You can see from this painting up here, depiction from that opera. The swan. The future king's passion for Wagner knew no bounds. The day I first heard the Lohengrin, I began to live, he wrote years later to Cosima von Bülow, the composer's lover and future wife. It was the beginning of a lifelong relationship between Ludwig and Wagner. In March 1864, King Maximilian II died, and Ludwig became King of Bavaria. Significantly, one of Ludwig II's first royal acts was to invite Wagner to the court at Munich that spring. Wagner had just left Austria. He was crippled by debt and unable to find a theater willing to perform his very expensive operas. Ludwig's invitation offered a breakthrough moment in his career. The king, then age 18, set him up with country and city residences and paid all his debts, which allowed Wagner to focus on his music. Ludwig's obsession with the composer intensified. On numerous occasions, the king told him that he felt a oneness with Wagner that Ludwig believed would continue even after death. Wagner's utopian lands, ruled by idealized rulers who brought redemption to their people, resonated deeply with the teen monarch. Wagner's soaring compositions, however, could not drown out the din of European politics, nor the discontent at home at Ludwig's preference for art and music over the affairs of state. The situation facing Ludwig was grave. The very existence of Bavaria as an independent state was threatened by the rise of the northern kingdom of Prussia, which, under Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck, sought to bring about the unification of all German states. In 1866, Austria went to war against Prussia, and Ludwig provided Austria, Bavaria's traditional ally, with military backing. Fortunately, he did not commit too many resources. When the Prussians defeated Austria, the consequences for Bavaria were not too grave. In 1870, Ludwig reached a reconciliation with Prussia and publicly voiced his support for the creation of a new German empire. In return, he hoped to obtain privileges for Bavaria. Having conceded so much power to Russia, especially in foreign policy, Ludwig then withdrew even more from political affairs. A king's retreat. Like his political life, the king's personal life was marked by retreat. Ludwig had been betrothed to his cousin, Duchess Sophie Charlotte of Bavaria, sister of the Empress of Austria, known by her nickname Sisi. Sophie shared Ludwig's adoration for Wagner. Despite their mutual interests, Ludwig became troubled by the prospect of the marriage and broke off that engagement in 1867. There they are right there. Correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't Sophie supposed to marry the Holy Roman Emperor or Emperor of Austria-Hungary, but then Sisi did instead? And now she had another broken engagement. Was that the same princess? I think. We're going to talk about this place in a minute. Isn't it beautiful? His lifelong refusal to marry and have children led to whispers of homosexuality, which would further complicate the king's rule. After he broke off his engagement, Ludwig took refuge in a magnificent castle rebuilt by his father near the Austrian border, Hohenschwangau, which is... no, wait, that's not Hohenschwangau. Okay, hold on. A spirit of poetry is flowing through the magnificent Hohenschwangau, he wrote to Cosima von Bülow in 1867. He ordered lavish improvements, including the redecoration of the royal bedchamber with scenes from the epic poem Jerusalem Delivered by the Renaissance Italian poet Tasso. A story of a Christian knight and a Muslim woman, the work centers on the struggles between love and duty. Ludwig's appetite was whetted for even more ambitious undertakings. He started to plan entirely new palaces to give full rein to his romantic instincts. Builder of castles. In 1867, having seen the architectural projects on display at the Exposition Universelle in Paris, Ludwig was inspired to build an elaborate medieval-style castle in the mountains of Bavaria. It was initially named Neu-Hohenschwangau, and only later became known as Neuschwanstein, meaning New Swan Stone, in recognition of Ludwig's association with the Wagnerian bird. The setting he chose was truly dramatic, high on a rock above the Polit Gorge, with a waterfall to the south and sweeping views of the valley to the north. Although Ludwig is sometimes characterized as being stuck in the past, he was also fascinated by the up-to-date architectural techniques showcased in the Exposition Universelle, the last word in modernity. These advances in iron and glass engineering enabled him to translate his flights of fancy into reality. Although the structure was not completed in his lifetime, he was able to spend time in the castle. Living conditions in the finished areas were hardly medieval. Hot water ran in the kitchen and bathrooms. The artwork inside the castle depicts scenes from some of Wagner's greatest operas, including Tristan and Isolde, the 4 operas that constituted the Ring of the Nibelung, and Parsifal. This is his bedroom in Neuschwanstein, by the way. Gorgeous. Gosh. Ludwig's sights, however, were set well beyond this one castle. Even while huge resources were being lavished on Neuschwanstein, he had plans to build a vast Byzantine-style palace on the site of an old hunting lodge once used by his father. The Linderhof Palace in southern Bavaria evolved into a somewhat more modest Rococo-style palace with carefully landscaped gardens. It is the only construction project Ludwig actually completed in his lifetime. Yet neither this nor Neuschwanstein sated his building urges. From 1878, the king began a third great palace, the Herrenchiemsee, on an island in a lake in southeastern Bavaria. Its style was an homage to the Palace of Versailles in France, built by King Louis XIV, with whom Ludwig obsessively identified. And that's this castle over here that we saw earlier. This is it. It was unfinished, that's why it just looks like half of Versailles, not the rest of it. Like a fourth of Versailles, to be honest. We're going to talk about this in a minute, too. Keep this in mind. More castles are planned, but the spree was proving ruinous as debt and Bavarian discontent were piling up. By the early 1880s, the project of German unification under the mantle of a now mighty Prussia was not giving Bavaria the advantages Ludwig had promised in 1870. A mysterious end. Ludwig's reclusiveness worsened the political situation, and his eccentric behavior was intensifying. Accounts show how he frequently put himself in physical danger through midnight rides in the countryside, like we saw on the other page. He started making grandiose claims, such as being a direct descendant of Louis XIV of France. The king's private physician, Bernhard von Guden, an eminent psychiatrist, declared Ludwig II unfit to govern. On June 9, 1886, the Bavarian government voted to depose him, and Ludwig's uncle, Prince Leopold of Bavaria, agreed to act as regent. On June 12th, he was forcibly transferred from Neuschwanstein to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg, where he was cared for by Guden. Tragedy would follow just days after Ludwig's deposal. On June 13th, 1886, he proposed an after-dinner walk with Guden. The two men did not return, and later that evening, in gale-force winds and driving rain, a search party found the bodies of both men in the shallow waters of Lake Starnberg. The king's demise was ruled as death by drowning, but no official cause of death was given for the doctor. These murky circumstances have led many to theorize different scenarios, none of which can be proven, including Ludwig murdering Gudin in revenge, then being killed while trying to escape himself. Here he is, interred. Which, it is a real mystery because he drowned in like ankle-deep water, and Gudin had no signs of drowning, but he was in the lake. So what happened, we'll probably never know. In addition to the mysterious circumstances of his death, historians have speculated whether the king really was as mentally unwell as Gudin claimed. A recent psychiatric review of Ludwig II's case carried out by the University of Munich considers that Ludwig's diagnosis may not have been due to psychosis, but more to do with socially unacceptable behaviors. Even so, the report concludes that Gudin's diagnosis of paranoia was well-founded. Studies of Ludwig's brain have shown extensive damage to his frontal lobes, the areas of the brain responsible for decision-making, emotional regulation, and impulse control. Most likely incurred during a bout with meningitis in infancy, this brain damage could be the root of Ludwig's condition. I wish to remain an eternal enigma to myself and to others, Ludwig once said. His wish seems to have been fully granted, as mystery continues to surround the Swan King. His castles, open to the public following his death, attract hordes of visitors, and his life has been the subject of numerous literary, theatrical, and film portrayals. Despite his financial incompetence in life, his many debts have been more than paid off from the enormous income that his fantastical castles have generated. This is the little hunting lodge he renovated. What was it called? Does it say up here? Linderhof. That's right. The one that he actually finished in his lifetime. And then the last picture here is his antechamber. You can see other rooms off to the side here. This looks like it might be like the bedroom. Maybe this is like maybe like a little chapel, since there's some kind of religious figure above the door. Looks like there's a place to kneel. I'm not sure, but this was in Neuschwanstein, completed shortly before his death. He didn't even get to enjoy because he was removed from the castle. But that is the end of our video for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this style of content, please consider subscribing, especially since we'll be having more history magazines soon when my channel members get to pick some new articles. So don't forget, if you want to be a part of that, you can click the join button or the first link in the description box. I hope you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good night. Doesn't he look bored here? He's out in his sleigh at midnight in the snow, and he's just like, this is the most upsetting. Even the footman is just like, I just want to go home and go to bed. Luckily, you get to do that now. Good night. Good night.